you've made the most compelling case I've ever heard for the need for something like Bitcoin. So you're saying, just to make sure that everyone's following this, the whole point of Bitcoin is to escape the inflation vortex that has consumed all these previous empires.
Today I've pulled one of my favorite clips from Michael Saylor's iconic interview with Tucker Carlson in November of 2021. I find this interview particularly fascinating because of Tucker. I think Tucker is intelligent, thoughtful, and a fantastic interviewer. He also admittedly knew next to nothing about Bitcoin at the time of this interview. I think that's what makes it such a good interview. In this clip, they discuss what money is, what the problem with money is, and most importantly, what the solution to the problem with money is. The US dollar is currently the world's reserve currency. The US dollar is fiat. Look at the image on the screen. It's easy to see that the US dollar is not healthy. Fiat money always hyperinflates. We clearly need a solution, and in my opinion, Bitcoin is that solution. Please drop a like on this video and enjoy the clip.
I didn't know what to make of cryptocurrency. I don't understand it. I made fun of it. It's clearly not going away. It's clearly a really big deal. So let's just start at the beginning, if you don't mind, explaining what is it?
Okay, what is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is the first engineered monetary system in the history of the human race. Full stop. So now to explain it, the first question is, what's money? The second question is, what's the problem? And the third question is, what's the solution?
Right.
Bitcoin is the solution. Now go back to the beginning. What is money? Well, an economy consists of goods, services, and property. You know, I want you to do something for me. I want that product. I want you to manufacture something for me. I want that house. I want that land. That's half the economy. Now the question is, how do I send 37 horses to you, and then how do we keep the books balanced? So you have to send me back money. Money is socio-economic energy. Money is monetary energy, or it's the energy, the backhaul energy that we use to trade with. If I can send you 10 bushels of corn and you can send me money equal to 10 bushels of corn, then we can trade with each other. So in the history of the world, human beings have tried different monies. We've used seashells. We used the giant stone coin of the Yap people. We used tobacco bales in colonial America. We've used copper coins, silver coins, we've used stone coins, we use glass beads in Africa. These are all types of money. Eventually, we got to settle on gold and gold coins as money, but gold was never fast enough as money. How do you move 10 tons of gold from here to there? So ultimately, people used ledgers, and those ledgers were issued by a merchant, or they were issued by a mayor, or they were issued by an emperor. And you can go back 5,000 years and you can find Sumerian tablets in clay where they've etched in like 37, bushels of oats in return for something. These were the ledgers. So money is that shared ledger of who owes what to whom. And a lot of times the money is a token, like a glass bead. But the problem with a glass bead is, if the Africans use a glass bead and the Europeans show up and they can manufacture 1 million glass beads, the Europeans dump 1 million glass beads on the Africans lose their homes and their livestock and all their wealth, and they're impoverished. So if you have weak money and someone else has strong money, if they can manufacture the money, like in the Pacific Islands, they use stone coins. Some European showed up in a ship and he realized that stone coins are rare on one island, but they're very plentiful, big stones on another island. He sailed to the other island, picked up the stones, brought them back to the first island, and enslaved everybody on the island. So it's like, problem. So the problem with money is, how do we keep track in a fair distribution of who owns a claim to what? If there's $100 million worth of capital in the economy of products and property and corporations and the like, you have to have $100 million of money. Now, if I issue $100 million of currency, it equals all the stuff in the economy. Now, if I start to inflate the currency and I issue another $10 million,
yes,
now I've taken 10% of the economy and given it to my friend. That's the inflation rate. If I keep inflating the currency, if I double the amount of currency, but the amount of stuff in the economy is constant, well, then the price of everything that's scarce and desirable doubles.
Yes.
Okay. If it's not scarce and desirable, it won't go up. But if there's 100 things and there's 10 times as much money, it stands to reason that the things cost 10 times as much. So money is economic energy. The problem is inflation. Because in the history of the world, we have inflation. When the Romans created gold coins, they start with a certain amount of gold, and they would debase the currency, right?
Yes.
They would cut the amount of gold or cut the amount of silver in the coin, and when they cut it to a small enough level, no one would take the coin anymore. So the mercenaries don't want the coin, the emperor can't pay the mercenaries, the empire topples. If I just issue you paper, whatever the paper might be, and then I triple the supply of the paper, eventually the currency collapses. So the problem with currencies in the history of time is the trust in the issuer. You're trusting an individual, right? You're either trusting a banker, a JP Morgan, or you're trusting a family, the Rothschilds, or you're trusting a king or a prince, or you're trusting a mayor, or you're trusting a government. Now, if we look at the modern era, economists like Seyfedin Ammous, who wrote the Bitcoin Standard, he estimates that the inflation rate in the modern era, dollar weighted, is 14%. Okay? Think about that. For the last decade, on average, all in the world, we've been inflating the currency by 14% per year. Now, it happens that that's equal to the rate at which the S&P 500 index is going up, 14% on average a year for 10 years running. What's the issue? Well, what is inflation? It's not really well understood. Some people think it's CPI. CPI is the rate at which a market basket of consumer goods is going up, but the government gets to pick the basket.
I've noticed.
Okay, if I pick things like Domino's Pizza and streaming YouTube videos, they will never go up in price. I can actually adjust the basket, so I just pick things that don't go up in price. The Case-Shiller index is up 27% year over year, in July. So the price of that average single-family home is up 27%. Homes in Canada up 15%. The S&P index is up 34% this year over 12 months. What's the inflation rate? If you wanted to buy a basket of desirable stocks, the inflation rate is the S&P index. So I can calculate any inflation rate I want. Inflation is a vector. If I want to be rich, then I need to buy scarce, desirable assets. So my inflation rate is the rate at which Picasso's and Leonardo da Vinci paintings and stocks and property in New York City is going up in price, or a house in the Hamptons. That's a high inflation rate. If I want to be a consumer and live in my parents' basement and order Domino's Pizza and take Ubers and watch Netflix and stream YouTube, the inflation rate will be the CPI. It'll be very low. So you can have any inflation rate you want. As a practical matter, the best inflation rate for an investor or for anybody that wants to stay wealthy or be wealthy, if you're concerned about maintaining your economic purchasing power, it's the monetary inflation rate, the rate at which the supply of money is expanding. The supply of money expanded maybe 10% for a decade before COVID, and the S&P went up 10% a year. We know the money supply expanded 30% post-COVID. The S&P is up 34%. The Fed stepped on the money printer. The same with the EU Central Bank. In the Western world, in the strongest countries, we see the money supply expanding 20, 25% or more per year. The currency is collapsing. It's losing its value. It's being devalued. In weaker countries, go to Argentina, the official inflation rate's 45%, the unofficial inflation rate's 85%. Go to Venezuela, the inflation rate, the currency's collapsed 98%, 99% in a year. Same in Lebanon, 90% currency collapse in a year. So what you have right now going on in the world is currency collapse, which we call inflation. And the mainstream view of inflation is it's only CPI, and sometimes it's PCE. It's an index of things not including the highly volatile food and energy.
Right.
But in what universe can you live without food and energy?
Exactly.
But it's not really good. Like common sense says, if everybody tells me inflation rate's 2% or 5%, but the houses are costing 20% more, or 15% more, and everything, if you talk to anybody that manufactures anything, they'll say that the prices are up 20%, 25% year over year. So how is it I'm supposed to actually buy something? How do you buy a share of stock that went up 34% a year when you got a CPI adjustment of 2% or 5%?
So it sounds like the people causing the inflation are lying about the inflation.
Classically, I just first of all, if you define inflation as the CPI, you're using simple arithmetic to describe the economy. You can't describe the economy and model it with simple arithmetic any more than you could describe fluid dynamics or aerodynamics with simple arithmetic. Right? The fluid is flowing around the airfoil. You have to have n-dimensional, algebra and vector calculus to describe a complicated phenomena. The economy is a complicated phenomena. Another way to say it is the price of everything is varying everywhere at different rates all the time.
Right.
Right. Common sense says the price of housing in the Hamptons is going up at a different rate than the price of land in Kansas. And the price will be going, and the price in a certain jurisdiction for a certain use, subject to certain regulations, will go up at a different rate than another jurisdiction for another use. So the problem is inflation. Inflation's a phenomena whereby a government authority prints more currency, right? And why do they print more currency? Because if I want to pay $1 trillion bill, I either have to tax you $1 trillion or I have to print $1 trillion of money. Turns out that it's a lot easier to print money than it is to tax people. And so it's either inflation or taxation. Throughout the history of the world, from Roman emperors before, every single coinage system, every monetary system ever established collapsed because of inflation. If you look at the history of the Sumerian states, the Persian states, the Greek states, the Roman states, Middle East, look at all the Renaissance Italian states. Look at every king of England. If you just go forward, you find every one of these currencies started by I issue a coin with this much gold in it, and then I cut it, and I cut it, and then I go to silver, and then I go to copper, and then I coat it with some brass or some nickel. You remember what happened in the U.S. where we used to actually have silver
quarters, yeah.
And now we don't because the silver was more valuable than the quarter.
Yes.
Why? Right? We're debasing the currency, right? So the problem is inflation.
And inflation, just to be really clear about what you just said, which was fascinating, is caused by expanding the money supply.
Yes. Simply put, you live in a town, there's 100 nice houses, there's $1 million in the money supply, the mayor prints another $1 million, distributes it to the citizens, what's the price of the house do?
Right. And you're saying that inflation is always the cause of the collapse of the currency, and the collapse of the currency sounds to me like it's the cause of the collapse of the civilization.
Yep. Because if you look at all these wars, right, how long does a war go on? In World War I, every single nation went off the gold standard within a week of the declaration of World War I. The Germans, the French, the Brits, the Americans, we printed money. The money got debased. There was rampant inflation. Eventually, after 4 years, you can print money for about 4 years before you collapse the currency, and then you don't have any means to fight the war. The Germans sued for peace because they ran out of money after 4 years. Okay. World War II, we ran out of money in 4 years. Vietnam, we paid for it with inflation. Eventually Nixon had to go off the gold standard because they'd printed so much money they couldn't redeem the gold. They defaulted on it. We went to the fiat standard, and we just began to print more money. You'll find that throughout history. And of course, put yourself into the position of the Roman emperor or the city mayor or the noble. You have a monopoly on the coinage. You need to pay the army. You can either go to everybody that lives in your nation and take half their stuff, or you can just print twice as many coins.
But I thought the whole idea behind modern monetary theory was as long as you have the world's reserve currency, inflation isn't a threat to you.
Well, if you print, how would you say this? If there's a certain amount of goods and services and capital in the economy, and you just keep printing money, you're not creating any more capital in the economy. You're not creating any more products. You're not creating any more buildings. You're not creating any more services. All you're doing is doubling and tripling the amount of currency. So if I just gave everybody in the United States $1 billion and everybody went out to buy a Ferrari, right? Would there be 250 million Ferraris? Like, I can print the money, right? Like, look at Venezuela, look at Zimbabwe. They can print the money. You can give someone $1 trillion note, but that doesn't create more stuff, right? You're just creating paper. So ultimately, that inflation, it works only to an extent if you can export it. And what you're doing is you're not creating anything. What you're doing is you're redistributing wealth. Like, if there's $10 billion in the economy and there's this much stuff, and I give $1 billion to you, you now get 10% of the stuff from somebody else, which means that everybody else lost 10% of their stuff, right? As I inflate the economy, or inflate the currency, I'm actually redistributing wealth from those that store their life savings in currency or currency derivatives, in cash. If you had $1 million in the bank 12 months ago, today it buys you 34% less, right? The S&P is up 34%. You have $1 million. If you put it in the stock market, you've got $1.34 million. If you hold it in cash, you've got $1 million. If you go to buy a stock now, it costs you 34% more to buy the stock. If you go to buy a house in the Hamptons, it's 40% more to buy the house in the Hamptons. You know, other things are going up in price, your cash is fixed. So it turns out that you've got some people that don't have net cash positions. If you're a sophisticated investor and you're wealthy, all of your assets are in property. You have buildings, you have companies, you have real estate, you have collectibles, you have sports franchises.
Right, you have things.
If you're middle class, working class, you're working for cash, and whatever cash you've got, right, is either sitting in the bank or you don't have a lot of net cash. So the real significance here is if the dollar loses 20% of its purchasing power each year, then the value of your salary is deteriorating by 20% a year. It's not falling at the rate of CPI inflation. It's falling at the rate of monetary inflation. The road to serfdom is working exponentially harder for a currency growing exponentially weaker. Okay? That's the problem. You're a dentist, you're generating 5% more a year for a decade. I'm inflating the money supply at 20% a year for a decade. If you save every penny in 10 years, you'll be able to buy 1/4 of what you could have bought today, because the price of housing is going up at 20% a year, and you're just not ever going to catch up, right? Because you're getting paid in currency. The only way you can actually stay ahead is to grow your cash flows faster than the rate of monetary inflation. And that's why the rate of expansion of the money supply is so critical. And that there's not even a word for that other than cost of capital. The best surrogate for monetary inflation, in my opinion, is the S&P index, a distributed market basket of scarce desirable products. So money is energy. The problem is inflation. If we're inflating at 10% a year, you know, you've got 10 pints of blood in your body. When you go to give blood, I take a pint out. When I take a pint of blood out of your body, you lose the red blood platelets. Anybody common sense knows you run the Boston Marathon the next day, you got a problem. You can't perform as an athlete. It takes about 4 to 6 weeks to replace the red blood cells. So when I take a pint of blood, you're not going to be able to perform for a month to two, probably 2 months later. Now, imagine if I actually took a pint of your blood every month, forever. That's inflation. So I'm running an economy, I'm the king. You know, you have a dojo, and I send someone from the government, and we just take a pint of blood from every one of your fighters, and then next month we do it again. And next month we do it again. And next month we do it again. Now, what do you expect your athletic performance to be?
In decline.
Yeah, that's the problem of a currency which is collapsing. But let me tell you, that's 10%. Venezuela's not 10%. Zimbabwe's not 10%. the Argentine peso was 1 peso to the dollar 20 years ago, and it's pushing toward 200 pesos to the dollar today. They've lost 95, 98, 99%. In a hyperinflating economy or a rapidly inflating economy, you're not losing 10% of your economic value a year. You're losing 20 to 25 to 30 to 40. So that's like I send some dude to the dojo to bleed you every week. And then at some point, I'm sending someone to bleed you every day, and that's the Weimar Republic, right? Hyperinflation. When, another metaphor, the currency is to the economy what your blood is to your body, and economic energy or money is to the currency what oxygen is to your blood. So common sense says if I keep sucking the oxygen out of the room, if I suck the oxygen out of the room, you're going to either suffocate or freeze to death. And if I keep sucking the economic energy out of the currency, the economy collapses. In the extreme, you get ripped back to Stone Age barter, right? When the money doesn't work anymore,
right.
I have to trade you cigarettes for bullets.
Right.
And the problem with that is the economy becomes 1,000,000 times less efficient, right? If you don't have money, now how many countries in the world have a collapsed currency? 66 are dollarized. There's 180 about countries. There's 130 floating currencies. All of them are weaker than the dollar. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency. The US dollar is expanding. It was expanding 10% a year for a decade, now expanding at 14% a year. It expanded 34% over the past 12 months. The dollar is weakening. Okay, it's like the oxygen is getting sucked out of the room. So Tucker, if I told you the oxygen is getting sucked out of the room and there's an oxygen mask drops out of the ceiling over there, what would you do?
Run for it.
Yeah, put the oxygen mask on. Bitcoin is the oxygen mask. Bitcoin, the idea of Bitcoin, let's move to the third
Let me just
spot,
pause and say,
right?
you've made the most compelling case I've ever heard for the need for something like Bitcoin.